EVO.
This series contains adult language and depictions of graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised.
So, Jeff, what's the first job or the most dangerous job you ever had?
Pretty much the same. First job I had was a series of delivery jobs, pizza, Chinese food, that sort of thing.
Was it dangerous?
No. Well, it was because I was a kid and I was driving. But what about you?
First job I got when I moved here was delivering photos for a photo lab.
Oh, yeah, that's right. And we got here at separate times, but for a minute we both had those jobs.
Selling pens, yeah.
Selling pens, imprinted pens, and giving away free Las Vegas vacations.
Yeah. I hated that fucking job.
Oh, my God, it was horrible.
You could slide for 2 weeks and they'd pay you, but then they put you on commission and that's when it sucked.
It was horrible. And may I speak to the owner, please? Oh, my God.
I remember this guy who ran it was such a prick. And I would just try and, slide by and, I would talk really quiet to the people and make sure they didn't fucking buy one of their pens. And I don't know at the place you were at, but this guy, what would happen is if he thought you had somebody on the hook, all of a sudden the whole place would turn around at you and go, sell, sell.
No.
Because they had those phones, they only could hear you. And I would be like, this fucking sucks.
That's terrible. Yeah, well, there was a whole room of people, a big boiler room.
Yeah. Any dangerous jobs you want to do?
Yeah, I'd like to be a Navy SEAL. No, I don't. There's no dangerous job. What about you?
No, maybe the most dangerous job I ever did was selling blow when I was 15.
Well, that's actually pretty dangerous. Is there a job you absolutely wouldn't do?
I mean, yeah, a bunch of them I couldn't think of.
For me, it's pretty much any job.
Yeah. And so why are we talking about jobs today?
Well, we're not just talking about any old jobs. We're talking about the most dangerous jobs in history.
Hi, I'm Bruce.
And I'm Jeff. Welcome to Taboo Treasures, a weekly podcast that explores the human obsession with objects of extreme rarity and infamy.
Today's episode, would it kill you to get a job? You can probably guess what some of the most dangerous jobs out there are, but if you can't, these are some of the jobs that OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, says are the most likely to get you killed.
Construction workers is one of them. There are about 7.5 million construction workers, and 2 million of them are undocumented. And including all the different kinds of construction, about 40 workers for every 100,000 get killed by, falls, electrocution, heavy machinery, power tools, stuff falling on your head, broken bones. There's almost nothing that can't kill you on a construction site.
Yeah, guys falling off roofs.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You might think the most dangerous construction job is what they call high steel workers, the workers who run around up there on girders building skyscrapers, but it's not. That shit scares the fuck out of me.
Oh, my God.
My butt's burning just thinking about it. What's most interesting is that in the beginning of this kind of construction, they were almost all Native Americans and mostly Mohawks.
Yeah, and they actually started calling them skywalkers. And over the course of about 120 years, they built some of the most iconic buildings and structures in the country.
Like which ones?
Well, in New York alone, for example, the Chrysler Building, the George Washington Bridge, the World Trade Center, apparently they were completely fearless, and they loved walking on those girders way the hell up there. I can't imagine. But to this day, a lot of them still work high steel, and they consider it a proud part of their heritage.
Yeah. Here's a fucking horrible job. Garbage men. And women. We take them for granted, but that all ends the minute the garbage goes on strike.
The garbage goes on strike.
Have you ever been in a city when the garbage men and women go on strike?
I was in New York in the 70s, and it was unbelievable. You were out of the country once, right?
Once in France. They take their strike seriously there. I think it was like garbage men and women went on strikes, and also the catering industry. It was weird.
Well, that's good because that means you're eating less food, so there's less garbage.
But there was lots of garbage out there.
Yeah, it's amazing how fast it piles up.
And they say 30 out of 100,000 garbage collectors get killed every year. How?
I know. I would have thought it was some version of getting caught in the thing, getting smashed in the thing.
Falling on your head.
But no, it's truck. They get hit by their own trucks.
Yeah.
What a way to go.
Yeah, that's not fun.
No.
Yeah.
And everybody always talks about how safe commercial airliners are, and it's true. But pilots and flight engineers make the list because along with helicopters, which are super dangerous, they pick up enough slack to make the fatal injury rate about 34 per 100,000.
To prove that there's no such thing as a job without a reality show, there are several on farming. They're mostly about keeping things alive, but farming got on our list by also making 21 farmers per 100,000 dead, mostly by getting sliced and diced and fried, mashed and smashed by their own massive planting and harvesting machinery.
And speaking of machinery, there are a bunch of reality TV shows about mining because we need more than one. One of them's called Coal, and you'd think that most of the 22 or so fatalities per 100,000 would have something to do with conditions or black lung or mine shafts caving in, but nope. For the most part, it's just another job where you get killed by a lot of dangerous machinery and equipment.
Yeah, and of course there are reality shows about truck drivers delivering things on American TV because America is the greatest country in the world. America, fuck yeah. Most of the workers on shows like Ice Road Truckers, which is as wild as you think, or Highway Through Hell, not the AC/DC song, aren't killed, but in general, out of every professional driver under pressure to deliver fast, 26 out of 100,000 die trying.
Yeah, and that seems pretty bad until you realize that it's lower than the per capita death rate by gun violence in Mississippi, and that's true. There's a crazy number of shows about logging and related jobs like The Last Woodsman, Swamp Loggers, Grizzly Camp, and Axeman. The injury rate for logging is about 91 per 100,000 workers. And if it never occurred to you that being a logger could be the second most dangerous job out there, watch a couple episodes of one of these shows and wonder no more.
And no one's going to be surprised by this one. Most of us, and we love it, have seen The Deadliest Catch. Try to imagine what it would be like to work on one of those crab boats in a fucking storm.
No.
Yeah. If you haven't seen that show, just go and watch it. We immediately thank God that we'll never have to go near one of those. But there's also other shows, The Wicked Tuna and Saltwater Cowboy, which are dangerous fishing shows.
Yeah, but
nothing like Deadliest Catch.
I'll take Wicked Tuna. Hunting's an obvious one. You could be eaten, but professional hunters also drown. They get burned in forest fires and so on. And averaged in with professional fishing, the fatal injury rate is a whopping 132 per 100,000 workers. But you know what didn't make the top 10? Cops. Go figure.
Sometimes it's hard to believe how horrible jobs we take for granted used to be. Going back as far as the Middle Ages, there's always been some awful, deadly job that has to be done by someone.
Of course, legislation and regulations have eliminated a lot of the dangers, especially in heavy manufacturing and mining. And kids, of course, are way better protected by legislation than they used to be. But until surprisingly recently, a lot of people risk their lives every day just to put food on the table.
Yeah, some are pretty self-explanatory, like leech collectors, which makes sense. When every disease was treated by doctors attaching leeches to people, you needed someone to collect them.
Or coal trappers who sat in mines and opened and closed doors to let carts through and to control the fumes. And of course, since spaces were small, it was mostly done by little boys, although some people used little girls because they were smaller and cuter.
Then there were the Powder Monkeys, which is by far the best job title ever. It's a good name for a band, too. We'll just tell you it involves children handling big bags of gunpowder on warships during the 18th century naval battles. Anyway, those are all good fun, but we saved some of the best ones for last.
Starting with lime burner, which in the Middle Ages, lime was used to build the kinds of walls that would stop a cannonball, so it became a valuable commodity. Lime powder was added to the plaster that made the walls, and to get the powder, you needed to put the lime in a thing called a lime kiln. It was unbelievably hot, and using it was physically exhausting.
Yeah, so were a lot of jobs at the time. But what made lime burning so dangerous was the lime fumes themselves. Because of the fumes, the kilns were generally in isolated areas, so if the operator passed out from the fumes, which they did all the time, free buzz, there was no one there to help them. And that's assuming that they didn't actually pass out in the kiln itself. Lime burners were blinded, burned, and paralyzed all the time. We still make lime, of course. It's just safer now.
Have you ever heard of the phrase called hoisted by his own petard?
No.
It's a Shakespearean saying that basically means someone's plan to do something bad backfired on them. So a petard is this frightening explosive device that the French army started using as far back as the 1500s. It was basically a giant iron ball stuffed with about 5 pounds of gunpowder. And the guys that loaded them and planted them and set them off were called petardiers.
Yeah, apparently they weren't the most predictable things. So sometimes when they went off, the petardiers would literally be blown up in the air or hoisted by their own petard. You can definitely make a case that this is one of the worst jobs ever, and some historians do.
Yeah, and speaking of history, interestingly, the term petard actually comes from the French word for firecracker, which also blows up some of the brainiacs who hold them too long at least once a year.
Yeah, we need a reality show about that.
Oh, that would be awesome, that, a whole category of Darwin Awards.
Have you ever had a firecracker go off in your hand?
No, and it's hard to believe considering how much I played with him. You?
Yeah, I did. It didn't feel good. It was like one of those half ones. What do they call it?
Was it like a black cat or a big?
No, it was a firecracker, but they were little ones. They were called lady somethings.
No firecracker should be called lady.
Yeah, and it was half size of a regular firecracker, and I just held it too long. Basically, my fingers vibrated.
Oh, that's not so bad.
Yeah, because I'm tough.
Kiss boy.
Ah oui, monsieur. Oui. Oui, oui.
Yes, a lot. Wait for the shake. Huh?
So gong farmers aren't actually people who plant gong seeds in fields and then raise gongs, although they probably wish they did. The good news for some Europeans is that for a couple hundred years, from 1500s to the 1700s, they had a new way to get rid of all the human piss and shit and vomit from their latrines and chamber pots and cesspits.
Yeah, and the bad news for other Europeans is that they were the way to do it. It's not much of a stretch to imagine how disgusting and humiliating and isolating that job was. Imagine spending any time around someone who shoveled out medieval sewers all night. And if you did, the doctor you'd go to for all the diseases you'd get would cure you with leeches. Now, not great social lives for those guys.
Yeah, it was really fucking dangerous. I mean, even if you survived the fumes and the shit and the piss particles that they all breathed all day, you'd have to consider the nature of what early sewage systems looked like. They weren't ventilated at all. And, when a guy came home from being a gong farmer, did his wife go, "How was your day, honey?" I mean, he probably would have rather taken his chance being with a lit petard.
There was a job called mule scavengers, which, of course, like us, you were probably hoping a mule scavenger was someone who went around collecting dead mules. But sorry to disappoint, but we're talking about spinning mules, which are machines with giant spinning wheels that are used to weave fabrics. They're still used today, but in the late 18th century, they were really primitive.
Yeah, when they were spinning, some of the material they were using would fall to the floor. So in typical American entrepreneurial spirit, to save money, the factory owners would hire someone to scramble under the giant wheels to gather it up while they were still spinning, so there'd be no interruption in production.
Yeah, and if you think the idea of crawling under a massive, deadly industrial machine to gather bits of string and fabric sounds stupidly dangerous enough for an adult, it was mostly done by children, of course, because they were smaller and the owners barely had to pay them anything.
When we think of dangerous jobs, there are a few common careers that probably pop into your mind, like the ones on our list. But some jobs that sound harmless actually used to be way more deadly than you might think. Most of these jobs are perfectly safe these days, but they didn't always start that way. Here are a few jobs you didn't know were dangerous.
One of the most surprising ones might be film projectionist, because up until the 50s, film was made of cellulose nitrate, which is so flammable it even burns underwater, and it's super explosive. Handling this stuff was no joke. A film projectionist in the U.S. died every 18 days. Nowadays, of course, film is made from much safer materials, except there's no such thing as film.
Remember the scene in *Inglourious Bastards, that when she blows up the theater?
Yeah.
It's a great scene. I wish it was real.
Yeah, that was realistic. I mean, you really could cause that kind of an explosion. It's wild.
Yeah. From all the way back in 400 BC up until the 1970s, lead was added to paint to make it dry quicker and last longer. So if you were a painter during those times, you probably came in contact with a lot of lead, which we now know is bad for your health. These days, paint is only allowed to contain a very little bit of lead, so lead poisoning is no longer a problem.
Dye maker isn't one you might think is dangerous, but in the 19th century, a Swedish chemist named Carl Scheele created this incredibly vibrant green dye that became a really popular color for clothes. Unfortunately, he used arsenic, so it caused everything from rashes to stomach aches and even death. Once someone figured out a green shirt wasn't worth literally dying for, they stopped using it.
Yeah, up until the 1970s, shoe stores often used a thing called a shoe-fitting fluoroscope to help customers get the perfect fit. They were essentially a little X-ray box that customers would put their foot into, and the salesperson could take a look and see if their toes were being squished. Why didn't they just ask the customer, are your toes being squished? Eventually, they decided that good-fitting shoes weren't worth the exposure to deadly radiation, and that was the end of that.
And talk about one you wouldn't expect on this list, hatters. In the 18th and 19th century, used mercury to make the felt that they used to make the hats. Mercury, of course, is a deadly chemical, so the people who made the felt and hats became irritable, shaky, and some of them even had hallucinations. And that's actually where the phrase mad as a hatter comes from. And this is true. When my sister and I were kids, I don't know where we got it, but we used to play with little blobs of mercury.
So that's what's wrong with you guys.
Yeah, well, handling mercury can cause neurological damage. So yeah, that explains a lot.
Your mesothelioma or asbestos lung cancer case requires a caring and family-oriented California law firm.
Mesothelioma is a fatal lung disease you get from asbestos. It can take 20 years to develop, and new cases are turning up every day.
The companies selling asbestos products knew about their dangers, but they didn't warn you. If you have been diagnosed with mesothelioma or lung cancer, call.
Well, that's nice. Right up to the 1980s, a lot of building products contained asbestos, including insulation, drywall, and floor and roof tiles. It was originally used for its insulation and flame-resistant properties, but inhaling asbestos dust causes everything from breathing difficulties to cancer. It wasn't completely illegal to use in certain products in the U.S. all the way up to 2024, which is fucking hard to believe.
I know, it really is. Yeah. One of the ones that's much safer now is fuel manufacture, because like paint, there was this chemical compound called tetraethyl lead that was added to fuel in the 1920s to increase efficiency. But it didn't take long for the side effects to start showing. Fuel production workers got headaches and started hallucinating, and in some cases even dying.
Yeah, a production plant in New Jersey was even nicknamed the House of Butterflies, after workers insisted they were seeing insects everywhere.
I know the feeling.
Leaded fuel is another example of something that wasn't banned worldwide until as recently as 2021, and it's even still used in some piston airplane engines.
What's the most dangerous job you or anyone you know has ever had?
Let us know and reach out to us at Taboo Treasures at Instagram and TikTok, or you can email us at tabootreasures@evocreative.com.
Matchmaker, matchmaker, make me a match. Find me a find. Catch me a catch. Matchmaker, matchmaker, look through your book and make me a perfect match.
No, not that kind. From around the 1840s to the 1910s, English women called match girls made matchsticks using white phosphorus. And white phosphorus fumes are extremely toxic, so a lot of the girls developed a serious condition known as phossy jaw, which is this horrible form of bone rot.
Yeah, it's been replaced by red phosphorus in matches now, but to give you an idea of how bad white phosphorus is, using it in battle can be considered a war crime. Wow. Right after radium was discovered, it was believed that it had powerful health and well-being effects because it made your skin glow. Except it literally made your skin glow because it was fucking radioactive. Radium started showing up in all kinds of cosmetics like makeup, lotions, hair treatments, toothpaste, deodorant, and even a drinkable radium tonic.
It's unbelievable. Yeah, nowadays, radium's only used in a very limited way in mostly medical applications like certain cancer treatments. But in the early 1900s, it became wildly popular because it glowed in the dark. So, of course, in those days, people thought it was magic.
From 1917 to 1926, the United States Radium Corporation was in the business of extracting radium to make luminous paints. As a defense contractor, it was a major supplier of radioluminescent watches to the military. Their plant in Orange, New Jersey employed 300 workers, mostly women, to paint radium-lit watch faces and instruments.
So they trained them to keep a good point on the brushes by licking them. So in other words, part of their job was to literally eat huge amounts of radium every day.
Yeah, they had no reason to think it would hurt them, so for fun, they'd sometimes paint their nails and their faces and even their teeth with it.
Oh, God.
But by 1927, at 3 factories in the United States, more than 50 of the female factory workers had died from radium poisoning after the owners and scientists lied to them for years.
Another company called Radium Dial had been established in 1922 in Ottawa. And like the United States Radium Corporation, they hired young women to paint dials for clocks with radium, and they told them to lick the brushes the same way the women in New Jersey did.
The women at Radium Dial began showing signs of radium poisoning in 1926 and 1927. Radium Dial leadership authorized physicals and other tests to determine the toxicity of radium paint to its employees, but they never made the records or results available to them.
Yeah, they just tried to cover up the real reason for the symptoms. So they told their employees to stop using the camel hair brushes, and they replaced the brushes with glass pens with a sharp point. But the women were paid by the piece, and the glass apparently slowed them down, so they went right back to using the brushes because they didn't know any better.
When they read in the newspaper that the women in New Jersey had filed a lawsuit, they were lied to by management and told those girls were just showing signs of a viral infection.
And that brings us to the inspiration for our Dangerous Jobs podcast, the Radium Girls. The Radium Girls were Grace Fryer, Edna Hussman, Catherine Schaub, and 2 sisters, Quinta McDonald and Elvina Latrice, all workers who'd had terrible radiation poisoning. They tried to sue the USRC, but no lawyer wanted to handle the case.
When they finally did find someone to handle the case, the USRC dragged the litigation out for so long that by the time of their first court appearance in January of 1928, 2 of them were bedridden, and the others were so sick that none of them could even raise their arms to take the oath.
Yeah, it's horrible. The USRC denied any wrongdoing, of course,
Right.
but they settled in autumn of 1928, and these women got the equivalent of only $183,000 each in today's money. By the time the radium process was eventually banned in 1928, something like 4,000 workers, most of them women, were hired by corporations in the U.S. and Canada to paint watch and clock faces with radium.
Dozens of women who suffered terrible effects eventually won lawsuits, but some of them were delayed in the courts for so long that they died before ever seeing a penny. The Radium Girls story holds an important place in the history of women's rights and the labor rights movements. It established the rights of individual workers to sue for damages from corporations for labor abuse, and labor safety standards like the baseline called provable suffering was created.
In 1949, Congress passed a bill that decreed compensation for all workers suffering from occupational diseases. The lawsuit and publicity was also a factor in the establishment of occupational disease labor law. Radium dial painters learned proper safety precautions and wore protective gear, but the fact that radium paint was still being used in dials as late as 1970s is hard to believe. The last factory making radium paint didn't shut down until 1978. And did you ever see radium watches when you were a kid?
I mean, I had a glow-in-the-dark watch.
That's radium, yeah. We all had, my parents had them, my grandmother got me one.
Nice present, Grandma, giving your grandson radium.
She was evil.
Who knew? So now we're going to give a little shout out to some whistleblowers. Vera English was a former General Electric employee who discovered widespread radiation contamination by GE. English was fired in retaliation for reporting the contamination in 1984. She took her case all the way to the Supreme Court, and it established the rights of whistleblowers to pursue cases under state law. The National Whistleblower Center filed an amicus brief in support for her case.
GE fought her for 10 years, but her win in the Supreme Court set a precedent that allowed whistleblowers to get relief under state laws. Ms. English told her story in the video How to Blow the Whistle and Win, a 1994 documentary produced by the National Whistleblowers Center.
In 1959, John Pace worked at the Santa Susana Field Laboratory near Los Angeles. I think it was in Simi Valley, actually. The lab was working on a project called the Sodium Reactor Experiment that led to the first nuclear-powered electrical transmission. But there was a partial meltdown along the way, according to Pace. The reactor building doors and reactor exhaust stacks were open, releasing radiation into the atmosphere.
Dan Parks also worked at the Santa Susana Field Lab as a health physicist in the 1960s, and he witnessed the burning of radioactive waste in burn pits and often saw workers illegally vent radiation into the atmosphere.
Yeah, there was a decades-long cover-up of the incident by the U.S. Department of Energy, of course. The operation predated environmental regulations, so early disposal techniques weren't recorded in detail. What we do know is that thousands of pounds of sodium coolant from the time of the meltdown are still not yet accounted for.
And the person who really brought whistleblowing into the American consciousness was a laboratory technician and labor union activist named Karen Gay Silkwood. She was known for reporting concerns about corporate practices related to health and safety in a nuclear facility and became the first woman ever elected to the union's negotiating team at the Cimarron fuel fabrication site in Crescent, Oklahoma.
Among other things, Keir-McGee made highly toxic plutonium pellets that Silkwood claimed was causing radiation sickness in their workers. After testifying to the Atomic Energy Commission about it, she was found to have plutonium contamination in her own body and even in her home. In November of 1974, she was driving to meet with a New York Times journalist and an official of her union's national office. But on the way, she was killed in a car accident. She was only 28 years old, and the circumstances of the crash have never been determined.
Yeah, of course, her story was the inspiration for Silkwood.
Yeah, great movie with Meryl Streep.
Yeah. You might be surprised to learn how much of the stuff you might find in an antique or thrift store was made using certain radioactive materials for the unique colors before scientists fully understood the potential health effects.
Yeah, we talked about glow-in-the-dark watches and dials that glow in the dark that contain radium or sometimes tritium and other radioactive isotopes. But imagine this, up until as late as the 1970s, some ceramics had radium in it as well.
And Vaseline glass, sometimes called canary glass, contains a small amount of uranium, and that's where it gets its yellow-green color. It also makes the glass glow bright green under a black light. The glaze used in cloisonné jewelry also gets some of its yellow, orange, and off-white colors from small amounts of uranium.
Radioactive antiques keep emitting very low levels of radiation for thousands of years, if not longer. It's not a lot of radiation, but it's enough to register on a handheld Geiger counter if you hold it close enough.
You can't really tell if a radium luminous device has radium in it, because the companies that made them weren't exactly incentivized to label them as being made with radioactive materials. The only way to find out is to use one or another kind of radiation detection instrument like the one Bruce just mentioned, a Geiger counter.
For the most part, clocks and watchmakers stopped using radium on dials by the mid-1960s. Some companies phased it out earlier, but it wasn't actually banned in the U.S. until 1968 when it became illegal to use radium in watch and clock productions. After 1968, other less harmful radioactive materials that glow in the dark like superluminova replaced it.
You can buy radium clocks all day long on eBay, or you can buy a vintage Rolex with glow-in-the-dark hands from the 50s for over $100,000. But now we're going to get to the seriously expensive shit.
Yeah, plutonium is one many of us have heard of because it's used in making nuclear weapons, of course. You need about 3.5 to 4.5 kilos to make a bomb, so it's a good thing that it costs only about $4,000 per gram, which we think is a great value.
Californium, I guess we know where that comes from.
Is there a show called Californium?
Well, scientists made it by bombarding another radioactive material with alpha particles, and we totally know what that means. It's used to treat certain forms of cancer, detecting gold, silver ores, and residual oils in reservoirs, among other things.
Yeah, if you want to pick up some californium to measure the amount of heavy metals in your smart water, it'll run you about $27 million for a gram. For reference, that's about 225 times more expensive than a gram of cocaine. And now francium, is it made in France? We got Pluto, California, and francium doesn't have a lot of use outside of scientific research, particularly in physics. It's so unstable that it decays practically as soon as it's created. But when you need some francium, nothing else will do, and that's why it costs around $4 billion a gram.
Which is nothing, as you'll see. Polonium-209 is sort of like the others because it has mostly scientific applications like geological and environmental research, but it fights static electricity too. So if your hair gets frizzy in dry weather, a little polonium-209 will fix you right up. And we don't know how much you'll need, but a gram is probably enough, and it's worth every penny at $49 billion per gram.
Oh yeah, that's worth every penny. Probably use some for like clothes in the dryer so they don't stick together.
Yeah, use them as dryer sheets.
Yeah. In scientific research, antimatter, the most expensive material on Earth, has all kinds of potential future scientific applications. Research using antimatter is being used to study the universe and create new atoms. You may have heard of a PET scan. It's sort of like an MRI, but much more detailed. They're made using a form of antimatter.
It's probably out of most people's reach in today's economy. But if you have the money, a gram will set you back about $65 trillion.
That's it?
Yeah.
That's nothing. So that does it for today's episode. We really hope you like it. Please reach out to us and tell us how we're doing. We haven't heard from anybody yet.
There might be a reason for that.
But if you want to tell us how we're doing, if we love us or hate us, you can do what, Jeff?
You can find us on Instagram and TikTok, or you can email us at tabootreasures@evocreative.com.
Goodbye. From EVO, Taboo Treasures is produced by Bruce Whitkin and Jeff Levine. Executive producer Brandon Morgan. Music by the Lonely Bulls.